what we've discussed before, like the Umayyads were mainly Arab, the Abbasids, and then we started seeing the Persians coming in, the Turks coming in. And then we moved to the west, we went to the Andalus. We've seen the Berbers, we've seen the Arabs over there, and then the Berbers, and then the Europeans who actually became Muslims. Then we moved again to the south, we've seen the Fatimids, who are a mix of Arabs and the Berbers of the area as well. We've seen the Murabids, Murabitin and Muwahidin, part of them Arab, part of Berbers, some of them were Africans. And then we moved on, we've seen the Ayyubids, and then till we've seen the Mamluks, who actually came from Asia, from Circassia and around Russia, and Turks, of course. So this time we're just shifting our focus. We're going to Southeast Asia, we're going to India. This is a great part of history we don't know much about. We're not taught about it in schools. So I think it's really of value to start learning about this part of history. Okay, so again, we're learning about the Muslim civilization, Southeast India. By the end of the lecture, we'll be understanding the important events, challenges that took place, whether in Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. We'll see their impacts on the Islamic art and literature and architecture. And again and again and again, we keep saying the same thing. History repeats itself. So this is just a lesson that we all need to learn and understand that regardless of the era we're living in, like even out these days, we are seeing the same events taking over, just different characters, different events, but the same thing happened over and over again. We need to know our Muslim heritage. We acknowledge that there are errors that took place previously in the past. We need to acknowledge them and learn from them so we don't repeat them again. Today's session is in India, but when we say India, is this the modern country of India that we talk about right now? Actually, it's not. So when we talk about India, we're talking about the subcontinent of India. Subcontinent of India actually is made of almost like 7 countries nowadays. Talk about India, talk about Pakistan, talk about Nepal and Bhutan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka down there. So all those countries together made the subcontinent of India. So when we talk about India today, we're not talking about the country of India, we're talking about all the subcontinent, 7 countries together. Okay, let's go in history and talk about when did the Arabs or Muslims get to know India? So there were always trade relations between the Arab and India. Even in the early periods of Islam, was trade going from Mecca and Medina all through the Red Sea all the way to the Indian coast. We talk about in the Umayyads lesson that Muhammad ibn al-Qasim took his armies all the way to the borders of India, and this is where he reached. But he did not make it into the Indian land. In India, there were 2 main religions over there, Hinduism and Buddhism. So Hinduism is polytheistic religion, meaning that they believe in multiple gods. Where Buddhism, they don't believe in gods, but they believe mainly in spirits. So that's what the state of India before Islam made it in. Another thing we need just to mention quickly, there was the Hindu social system. We're not going into details, but you need to know there are different layers, or not layers, different social categories. On top, there is the Brahmins, where these are the priests. They have all the power, they have all the privileges. And all the way down, we got the Dalit, which basically, or the Shudra, and they are on the bottom of the social scale. They're sometimes getting abused, they don't have much rights. So the Brahmins have all the power, all the Shudra, and the Dalits, they don't have much power. Okay, so we talked during the Abbasids era, if you guys remember, when the Abbasid Caliphate started becoming weaker and weaker, we had some states separating from the Abbasid Caliphate and starting making their own states. One of those states that separated from the Abbasid Caliphate was the Ghaznavid state, or the Dawla al-Ghaznawiyya. This is what we're talking about today. So they are originally Turkic tribes. They acknowledge that the Abbasid Caliphate is in charge, but they are actually ruling their own state. And the Ghaznavid Empire takes the credit, or they had the honor of spreading Islam into northern India. Mahmud al-Ghaznawi, one of the very famous Ghaznavid rulers, and for him, the spread of Islam in India started. Mahmud al-Ghaznawi had almost 17 battles of his life that he tried to spread Islam into India. Okay, so why did he start having fights with the Hindus or those who are living in India at that time? So when people started hearing about Islam and the new empire that's lying down on their borders, the Ghaznavid Empire, some India started thinking, okay, we need to move over, or we need to convert to Islam. But actually, because of the Hindu social system that we mentioned a while ago, the Brahmins prevented the Shudras, or the people who are lower on the social system, to convert to Islam. So those who are actually abused in the Hindu social system wanted to escape to becoming Muslims, but the Brahmins, or those who are on top, prevented their conversion to Islam. So that was where the trigger took place between the Ghaznavids and the Indian lands. After the Ghaznavids, we got the Ghurid Empire. As you can see on the map, the war expanded further and further and started going into northern India compared to the Ghaznavids. The Ghurid Empire didn't stay for long. After the death of the last sultan, the Mamluks started taking over. If we remember from last lecture, or the last Kahoot that we had, the Mamluks, who are the Mamluks? So they were slaves who were brought from the west of Asia or Europe, and they were highly educated, highly trained, and they're there to serve the ruler or the sultan, right? So this is what happened. So the last Ghurid emperor dies, his Mamluks take over the country. And when we say Mamluks, please don't confuse them with the Mamluks of Egypt we've discussed last week. So moving over to the Sultan of Delhi. So this is the Mamluk Empire that's showing up now. That's arising. So it started in 1206 to 1526, so almost more than 300 years in power, right? And they took Delhi to become their capital. One of the most famous rulers for the Sultan of Delhi was Qutb ad-Din Aybak. Again, he's one of the Mamluks, and he had multiple qualities, right? He was known for justice. And one of the bad, let's put it this way, bad is actually even worse than that, practices that was going on in India is that after a man dies, not only that the Brahmins took the wealth or the money, or his family took all his wealth, but his wife actually was supposed to be burned alive with the husband. So when the husband dies, they just burn the corpse, they burn the body, but they don't burn the body alone, but they burn actually his wife, because at this era they looked at the woman as being properties of men. Of course, when Islam came, when the Mamluk Sultan came, they abolished this practice. This has been not going on from there on. One of the famous architecture remain that we see from Qutb ad-Din Aybak or the Mamluk era is the Qutb Minar. So this is the last remain, the Delhi fortress or the Delhi old city. So this site is still there, and so back then it was Delhi old city. This was a part of the fortress, and this is the only part remaining of it right now. It's Qutb Minar. This is a victory tower there. So after Qutb ad-Din Aybak came another ruler, Lututmush, and he dies. He defended the Indian lands from the Mongol invasion. After his death, his daughter takes over. In Arabic, it's called Radiya Sultan, and of course in English, or it's called Razia Sultan, or especially in the Indian literature. So she's the first female ruler in the Islamic world. So then the question is she the first Islamic ruler in the Islamic world, or Shagar ad-Dur? Remember Shagar ad-Dur last time we mentioned her? Actually, Razia Sultan even came before Shagar ad-Dur. It's just, we're talking about like just few decades difference. So her father, before his death, would actually prepared her to rule. She was wise, she was having proper education, was having good Islamic preparation as well. And she, after his father death, she takes over the kingdom. And it was age of prosperity, and actually those coins were used in her ages. What happened after that? Some of the princes who didn't like her rule arranged a rebellion against her and took her down, and unfortunately she was killed. So after her death, a new dynasty takes over, Khalji dynasty, and you see the spread of the empire, spread of Islam into new parts of India. The difference here, what happens is they're not Turkish tribes anymore. Now we see the new Indian identity, new Indian Muslim identity showing up. So they're not foreigners anymore. They're actually those who are living, actually are Indians, became Muslims, and their descendants. So now we see a new generation of Indian Muslims showing up. Anyway, the Khalji dynasty, it doesn't stay for long. A strong dynasty takes over after the Tughlaqs. Tughlaqs, one of their famous rulers was Ghaythuddin Tughlaq. They call him Abi Mujahid. And why do they call him Abi Mujahid? Because he's continuously fighting in India for the spread of Islam. This was the age of the peak extension of the Delhi Sultanate. Not only that, he had that ambition that he actually takes the Islam not only to the other parts of India, but actually to cross the Himalayas up here and go all the way to China. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen during his lifetime. It was stopped, but he was so ambitious that he wanted to spread Islam and serve Islam and take it over to other places. During the Tughlaqs, they reached out actually to the Abbasids, who at this stage they're still having the results of scientific advancement, and they actually brought from the Abbasids the gears. Remember we said that the Abbasids, they invented the gears and wheels, so actually they brought in the gears and the wheels into India at that time and started the scientific advancement that will continue later on. I know the names, there are multiple different to pronounce names. You just need to hear it once. You don't need to memorize any of that, but this is just for everyone to learn about the Delhi Sultanate history. Meanwhile, we have another empire at the western or northwestern borders showing up, is the Timurid Empire. Remember we mentioned in the past when the Abbasids was in power, we said there was always that danger coming from the east, that was the Mongols. So the Timurid Empire, actually the Timur Lenk or Timur Lane, depending on the literature, kind of literature was English or Arabic, or depending on kind of literature you're reading, that's the founder of the Timurid Empire. So this guy actually was a descendant of Genghis Khan. If you remember Genghis Khan, he's the founder of the Mongol Empire. He was known that he gathered armies and goes into empires or different states, and he just take it down. He doesn't stay in it. And afterwards, he just puts someone to rule in his name. And this is what he has done. So he creates a big army, goes all the way to Delhi, which is, the capital of the Delhi Sultanate, right? And destroys the Tughlaq dynasty. Just for you to know that, yes, he was known that he destroys empires and states, and he was known actually to destroy the Ottoman Empire, which actually was on the rise in Anatolia. But he didn't do the same in his country. Actually, he was taking great care of empire, and some of the very famous, worldly known architectural sites are in Samarkand right now. So look at this picture. So this is from Samarkand. This is the capital of the Timurid Empire. So it's just beautiful. Just wanted to share this video as well. So moving on. So now the Tughlaqs are gone. So the whole dynasty is done. The Timurids leave, and they started fighting in there. The Ludis in power, and they started a civil war who to rule. And you see how small the empire became after controlling almost the whole of India. And he's thinking of going to China back then, right? So it became a very small piece of land. They started having a civil war. The princes who were fighting amongst each other reached out to Mughal Babur. Mughal Babur is a prince Actually, he's a descendant of Timur Lane. He moves over with his army in the Battle of Panipat, and he wins. There was a victory against the Ludis, and he takes over the country and establish Mughal Empire. Let's talk about Mughal Empire. So we talked about 300 years with the Delhi Sultanate. This is another 300 years of the Mughal Empire. It started in the 1500s. So for India, this was the golden age. We're talking about 300 years of prosperity that took place in India. During the Mughal Empire, there were multiple capitals. We got Agra, where Taj Mahal is there, right? Delhi, Lahore, Fatehpur Sikri. So all of those were 4 capitals, different capitals. Or they were following the Sunni faith and using the Hanafi school of jurisprudence. We talked about we talked about Al-Madhab al-Hanafi before, right? Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man, we talked about it when we talked about the Umayyads. Mughal Empire at this era was one of the 3 Islamic gunpowder empires. So together with the Ottomans, together with the Safavids, and the Mughal Empire, all 3 of them were the 3 Islamic gunpowder empires. Mughal Empire was one of the wealthiest empires came on earth at this age. So it was the 2nd largest world economy. The economy was even stronger than whole Europe at that time. Okay, it was only 2nd because it's said as China came first. Some people say no, they were the 1st. Anyway, they're one of the world's largest economies. 25% of the products that came worldwide came from the Mughal Empire. Okay? More than 25% of industrial products. But actually, it's not industrial; it was agricultural. But the products were, manufactured in India. So I just put this picture for comparison. So look at the United States. This is modern age now. So the United States almost composed 24% of the world economy. Right now, this United States is the world superpower, right? At this age, Mughal Empire was creating or producing more than 25% of the world economy, contributing to 24% of the world economy, and creating more than 25% of the products worldwide. So compare the Mughal Empire to the United States right now. So let's move on, talking about the Mughal emperors who ruled this great Islamic empire. So Babur Shah. Babur Shah is remember the prince that the Ludis asked for their help? So he actually moved down from Afghanistan. He's a descendant of Genghis Khan from his father's side and Timur Lane from the mother's side. So he was known to be a great warrior. He started spreading Islam further into India. It was said about him that he never spent 2 Ramadan in the same city. This means that every year he keeps moving from one city to other to spread the Islam in India. So that was Babur Shah, and he is the one who founded the Mughal Empire. We still talk about Mughal emperors. Akbar Shah. Akbar is one of actually the most famous Mughal emperor you'll hear about. Okay, in his age, there was age of tolerance. Hindus were always in his court. They occupied the highest positions. They were ministers, advisors. So both Muslim and Hindus. So there was an age of tolerance where everybody accepts each other and they coexisted together. It was age of science as well. He encouraged scientific advances. Actually, in his era, rockets were invented. So in the wars at this time, they used war elephants. War elephants were very powerful. So actually, in his time, the rockets were invented. It was not like rockets that we know like now, but basically it's early stages like mini rockets used against the war elephants back. Mughal Empire was still under the Sunni faith. And Akbar Shah, though he lasted in power for almost 50 years, at the end of his era, he was advised or came up with the idea that let's create a new religion where we actually combine all religions together. Islam, Christianity, Hinduism. Of course, this didn't last for long. Akbar dies. Scholars spoke publicly against it until it was taken away when his descendant came into power. So Akbar Shah, remember Akbar Shah is one of the most famous rulers for the Mughal Empire. Moving on to another emperor, Shah Jahan. So when we talk about Shah Jahan, we all remember Taj Mahal. So he built Taj Mahal it's a mausoleum, actually a tomb, where his wife is buried. So he made this whole great white marble palace just for his wife to be buried in, and he got buried in as well. So he created the Taj Mahal. Yes, everybody remembers Taj Mahal, but he actually took good care of his empire. He made alliances with the Ottomans back then because both of them were the world superpowers, and both of them developed the artillery and the weapons and so on and so forth. And both of them were in fight against the Safavids, which is the Shia empire going on. They're both neighbors at this stage. So he was one of the most famous rulers that ruled Mughal Empire as well. The last great emperor was Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is entitled the defender of Islam, and the maximum expansion of the Mughal Empire took place in his era. If you compare this to other maps that we've looked at earlier, Aurangzeb takes the credit for the Islam spread in more Indian territories. His age was known for tolerance. Hindus were free to build their temples. He ruled almost for 50 years as well, similar to Akbar, right? However, some rebellions started taking over, happening in the south. When this started happening, the fights between Hindus and Muslims started. Some Hindus took some mosques down, and some Muslims started taking some Hindus down, some Hindus temples down. So that's why in history you may read the conflict between Hindus and Muslims started in his era. So Aurangzeb, the defender of Islam. Okay. So moving back to Europe. So what was going on in Europe at this stage? So Europe was always in need for Indian products because India was the great supplier of textiles, cotton, spices, so on and so on. But for Europe to go or to reach Indian lands, they have to go through the Mamluk lands or they have to go through the Ottomans. So they have to go through Muslim lands. Then the Europeans or the Christian nations at that era were always having fights, especially the Portuguese and the Spanish having fights with Muslim power, the Mamluks and the Ottomans. And last week we discussed the Portuguese Mamluk Wars. However, we know that Europe started in the 1400s, the Renaissance, and when they got knowledge, the science from the Andalusians in the 1200s and 1300s, which paved the way for age of exploration, for the age of scientific advances in Europe afterwards. So Renaissance takes over. They started thinking, we don't want to go through the Muslim lands anymore. We're having continuous wars with them. So what do? So the Portuguese send out Bartolomeo Diaz, one of the Portuguese explorers, and goes all the way around Africa, and he discovers the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape of Good Hope allowed them to bypass the Muslim lands. So they went all the way through Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and all the way to the Indian coast. Now they were exposed for the first time to the Mughal Empire wealth because they are going there more frequently. Now they're staying longer. You don't have to worry about their enemies in the Middle East, the Mamluks and Ottomans. And they started shifting their focus to this empire. But the empire was so strong early on. Akbar Shah was there, Shah Jahan was there, and Aurangzeb. So they're all strong emperors. You cannot do anything. So they started thinking, okay, let's create a company for trade. And that's what they did. And this is the Eastern India Company, one of the most famous companies in history. Why? Because it started as a trader, just a trading company, but ended up as a company that invaded whole India and started the era of colonization of India. After Aurangzeb, we started having some weak rulers. Unfortunately, rebellions started taking over as well, especially started taking place, especially in the south. We're starting even seeing some Hindu kingdoms rising, the Maratha. East India Company starts taking advantage of the weakening of the empire. Why should we just be a company? Let's start expanding. Let's do something more. So they start telling the emperor back then, oh, we need to get more British soldiers to protect ourselves, to protect the British companies or British belongings. So he allows them, and they bring British soldiers in. As the empire gets weaker, they start controlling a province like a city state, and they control the first state. And when they see that everything was okay, no resistance, they abolished the rules, the Mughal rule, and started applying the British law, and they started expanding into other provinces. And they keep expanding and expanding until the emperor started thinking, okay, now we need to stand up for them. And they start fighting the British and the Mughals, the Battle of Mosar. Unfortunately, the Mughals were so weak and they were so busy with the civil wars going on, and they lose for the British, and that was the Battle of Mosar. By the way, this image I got, this was the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So anytime we look at from this era, when you look at movies, they're always using the English Indian Company logos, EIC. That's the one. So I thought it was interesting. Now, Great Britain is in power. What have they done? So the very first thing, they closed Islamic schools. The Muslims have been so strong, they have been well educated. We don't want them to be knowledgeable, so they don't create any problems. So let's close their schools. So remember, education is always the way. Proper education paves the way for great minds. So they closed the schools. So they control the wealth of the Mughal Empire, right? So they had all the trade, they have all the wealth. Now they have the schools. So Muslims started showing signs of poverty. They don't have the money anymore, right? Starting showing ignorance because the schools were gone. Not only that, and they started doing the divide and conquer policy. So they reach out to the Hindus and say, why do you let the Muslims rule? You are the majority. Okay? And the Muslims came from outside, and they started spreading the hatred between Hindus and Muslims. Not only that, and they started Christianization. So what does this mean? Converting Muslims and Hindus to Christianity. So that was done under the Great Britain's knowledge and rule. What happened is, after Britain is in power now, they were actually using the Muslims and Hindus as their workers. The Indian rebellion that happened, Great Indian Rebellion that happened, was because they forced their workers, the Muslims and Hindus, to use the grease of pigs and cows. So they asked the Muslims to use the beam, bite on the grease by their mouth, release the grease, and use it for using bullets and weapons. And they did the same for Hindus. So this what triggered the rebellion early on. And of course, this was Eastern India Company, right? So the revolution spread throughout the whole India, and the Muslims were sparing women and children, right? So they're only fighting the soldiers. This is what Islam teaches, right? We have to have mercy, shouldn't touch, even in case of wars, you're only fighting those who are fighting you, okay? Unfortunately, the rebellion didn't have a good leadership, or actually wise leadership, because the British was so strong then, and the Mughals were so poor and were so weak then, that the British takes over with their advanced weapons, and they go to the last emperor, Bahadur Shah, that you see in the picture, and not only they capture him, they kill his children in front of him. For the adults, please go ahead and read what happened in history for him and his son, for his children. But what for everyone you need to know today, killed his children in front of his own eyes, and they sent him to exile, kicked him out of the Indian subcontinent. Now Mughal Empire is gone and becomes what history we call the British Raj. And World Raj means rule or government, so it becomes under the official control of the British government, the British Raj. And Queen Victoria becomes the first Empress of India. So Indians stayed in power from the 1800s until the Indian independence. In the picture here, everybody knows Mahatma Gandhi, right? So Gandhi led the independence movement against Britain, but it was not him him alone. Was this guy next to him. It's Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the leader of All Muslims League. So actually he and Gandhi led the movement for independence from Britain. However, of course, everything, when they started having conflicts together, I'm talking about Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Indian politicians, they said, okay, we're going to separate. India get divided in 1947. 1947 is one of the bad years in terms of there was the India's partition, and this was the same year that Palestine was actually divided as well. Okay, so back to our story here. So India was divided in 1947 into Pakistan and India. This is a famous picture from the mass migration that happened, Muslims leaving India to their new state. So just imagine people who lived in India for Muslims who lived for like almost 600 years are being moved out or actually moving to this new state, calling Pakistan. So this is what. So India and Pakistan, they do not have a friendly relationship. Unfortunately, they start having wars together all the time. We're having Kashmir stays a problem for Pakistan and for India and even China. And they kept having wars about it. So India and Pakistan are always having wars and fights against each other. Not only that, even Pakistan loses part of its land down here and becomes the state of Bangladesh established. So Muslims actually, part of them will be in Bangladesh, some of them will be in Pakistan. So a common question that most people think, so Mughal Empire lasted for 300 years, Delhi Sultanate for 130 years. So Muslims have been in these lands for 600 years. Why is India not a Muslim? At the moment, India has 250 million Muslims. It's considered the third biggest population of Muslims worldwide, after Indonesia and after Pakistan. And the Mughal Empire was a classic example of coexistence where Hindus were ministers, were advisors, were traders. They controlled the country together with Muslim friends or neighbors. However, remember the Mughal Empire did not ever control the whole subcontinent. It was always that area in the south they were not able to control. Remember as well, we mentioned the social system, the Hindu social system, where those who are lower in the social class were trying to escape always to Islam, but they were not allowed to by the Brahmins or those who are power. But they always need somebody to serve them. Just imagine if all the slaves and servants flee, who's going to serve those who are in power? So social system were always used against Islam, whether preventing them physically or having bad propaganda against it. Another reason that some of the Mughal emperors were using force against the Hindus as well. We have to acknowledge that as an error, right? Britain comes in, the divide and conquer policy starts happening, the hatred starts being implanted between Muslims and Hindus. Of course, India's partition, the mass migration of Muslims from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So when we talk about heritage, they started using Persian because remember, they came from Turkic tribes and they were greatly affected by the Persian empires, using Persian language. Hindustani was the common language in the lands where people were using. Urdu was a language that was developed from both Persian and Hindustani. It's actually official language right around Pakistan, and it still is recognized as official language, a second official language in India as well. So Urdu was developed. Let's talk about some architectural remains that we have in India. So this is the Masjid al-Jama, or Jama Masjid in English. If you look at any movie and they want to present the Indian Muslims, they put this masjid over there. And if we have anyone from Indian ancestry, feel free to jump in on that. So the Jama Mosque, Jama Masjid. We talked about Qutb Minar, right? So this is what's remained, and this is the victory power from the Delhi Sultanate. And this is tomb for one of the sheikhs back then, Rukn al-Alam. I just wanted to share with you how beautiful the architecture and the colorful and the designs and how beautiful things were under the Mughal. Of course, we cannot talk about Mughal Empire. We don't talk about the Taj Mahal. We talk about Shah Jahan, the one who established it. The beautiful white marble building was built for Mumtaz Mahal. Mumtaz Mahal was his wife. That's why it's called Taj Mahal, right? From his wife. So both Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal are actually buried in the Taj Mahal and actually in the city of Agra in India. I want to share another one that was actually in Pakistan. Remember Pakistan and India? Both of them were one piece of land under the Mughal Empire. This is the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore in Pakistan. It was built by Emperor Aurangzeb. Science. So Mughal Empire, as we said, was the second largest economy, was one of the wealthiest countries or states. They took care of science pretty well. Okay. Akbar actually established the House of Translation back then. But if anybody mentions the Mughal Empire, they remember their advances in engineering and weaponry and metallurgy. Metallurgy, by the way, is the science where they look at metals and the properties and how they purify it and how they can use it for industrial reasons. You can use it for weapons. You want to use it for any other reasons. This is what metallurgy means. So the advances in both engineering, weaponry, and metallurgy, they were able to create weapons that was not even existing before. So this is what we call volley guns. They were able to fire bullets from multiple outlets rather than just one. This is cannons. This is the rockets that we mentioned early on that was invented during the Akbar's era. Remember the war elephants? Actually, they kept using it during the Mughal Empire. Okay? So rockets have been used since then on Mughal Islamic. Astronomy, they took care of astronomy as well. So Humayun, who was one of the emperors, has his own astronomical, he encouraged astronomical advances. He was into astronomy and he actually built his own observatory. And they had so much advanced in chemistry as well and textiles. Just fun fact that you guys need to know that the word pajamas actually comes from the Mughal Empire. It's Persian or Urdu. So the word pajamas, the Europeans actually took from the Mughals, because back then in Europe, they were just using wool. They didn't have access to cotton as much as the Indians did. So they took the pajamas from them. Not only that, even the shampoos that we use actually were invented during the Mughal Empire. So in summary, remember the Mughal Empire was the last Muslim empire in India. It's the wealthiest world superpower and one of three gunpowder superpowers. Okay? Can still see great architectural heritage. It was an era of coexistence of politics between Muslim and Hindus. It was not just for Britain. Things would have been different. Remember, by education, that they always encourage the care of science, and they spread the word of Islam in India and neighboring countries. I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I think I will just stop sharing.